Welcome back to another episode of Enterprise AI News. I'm your host, Troy Angredon, and I'm here with my co-host, Ian Wilson. Ian, how are you today?
Good. Thanks, Troy. How are you?
I'm good. So I gather we're going to be talking about AI in the DoD again. We've done a couple episodes of this. So what have you got for me today?
Yeah, we have. So I keep coming across things about AI in defense, and particularly looking at the Department of Defense in the US. I should mention that for the global audience. Um, and I particularly key on that because I'm really interested in what they're doing. I've been watching some of their videos and looking at their operating model, looking at the way they're setting up their training and their center of expertise,
Mhm.
center of excellence. I really like what they're doing. And they've just hired a new chief digital and artificial intelligence officer. We talked last time about a new deputy that they just hired.
Yeah.
This person, Craig Martell, head of machine learning at Lyft. So that's interesting because we think about people in defense industry kind of coming from the defense world. Lyft being ride hailing taxi service, obviously very much not defense, I would think. So interesting to see that they're pulling from Silicon Valley. Um, on the flip side, um, talking about going around, then we've got the former Joint AI Center in the DoD COO, Martin Klein, named Defense and Intelligence SVP at C3 AI. Now, C3 is a big enterprise AI platform.
Mhm.
Really a platform I really like what they're doing. So I'm assuming Martin will be heading up, well, it actually says here, Senior VP for Defense and Intelligence. So a lot of AI companies actually come out of the defense world. So interesting to see people
Yeah.
coming now from um, kind of the consumer AI world into the defense AI world, and then go from defense into enterprise. I would actually mention, if you do have time, go over and look at the JAIC's YouTube channel. They've got some really very interesting videos you can see if you want to set up your own center of expertise. Um, but looking at what's actually going on in terms of AI, Pentagon's flagship AI effort, Project Maven, as I'm told, and I just said Maven. This is kind of, skunk works under the hood, looking at satellite imagery using AI across the military. It's being transferred to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which I guess is its natural home. But what we're seeing here is obviously some of the first real heavyweight uses of AI, and it would surprise nobody that it's in geo intelligence, which is it's
Right.
actually looking at satellite images, etc.
Yeah.
So it's a very simple scale problem. Instead of having people trying to look through a billion images, you have a machine do it in an hour,
Right.
and do it really well. So that's interesting, but it leads us on to another point that we wanted to talk about. Here's an article from Steve Blank. I'm sure a lot of you have known Steve Blank um, from his books and his work with lean startups. A bit of a mentor to many of us in the startup world.
Hmm.
And he's talking here about lessons for the DoD from Ukraine and China. Essentially, it's talking about here you've got something very similar, hacking for defense, student teams looking at satellite images. That's essentially this program, Project Maven, which no doubt cost the taxpayer billions of dollars.
Right.
Here we've got students doing it using off the shelf commercial technology. So we've got defense moving into that kind of, I shouldn't say consumer space, but that space where those people live. And we see this in Ukraine, where the military there are using cheap off the shelf drones. They're shipping them from China, probably through Amazon, to defeat the Russian military. So a very different world that is coming around. And I think obviously AI is going to play a really important part in that. Most, lots of people won't like that, won't like the idea of that, but it is coming. And I think another example of that I noticed from the information. Here's somebody that's quite famous in the startup world, Palmer Luckey. He built a company called Oculus VR that made a VR headset that I believe they sold to Facebook,
Hmm.
made a lot of money. Now he's building a startup selling AI powered defense technology. Just raised $500 million for a $7 billion valuation. Now, besides the fact that's a lot of money, I think it shows this trajectory where we're moving into this AI powered world, but the people that are doing it are coming from a completely different space. So he's coming from a gaming headset space, a
Right.
VR headset, into the defense world, which I think is quite interesting, particularly for me, because I started my AI career using VR headsets to do defense AI technology. So that's kind of 20 years ago. So things come around a bit, but a lot of interesting trajectories there to see. And obviously, given the new geopolitical world we find ourselves in now, AI, I think, is going to play an increasing part of that.
Mhm. There's so many interesting threads here. I know we want to keep this brief, but the Microsoft HoloLens is also being used in a lot of those sort of defense environments. I think they just signed a recent contract for another big contract to do a whole bunch of testing with the HoloLens VR glasses. A friend of mine, former military, has been working with them and doing a lot of really interesting sort of beta development work in there the last few years, which is public. I think the key thing is kind of backtracking to that comment about Steve Blank, and Steve is a favorite of mine. And that post I really love. I mean, I love all his work, but in particular, the drum he's been banging lately, which is
Mm,
the U.S. needs to move forward. It needs to evolve. It needs to evolve quickly. That Ukraine and China, or in particular, the battle in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, are really showing that everybody, in particular, Russia's fighting the last world war with their equipment and their approaches, and they're being beaten by $300 drones, and swarms of them that are just dropping grenades on their tanks and wiping out these tanks. And so kind of light, fast, cheap consumer grade technologies, they're wiping out military grade hardware. So I think there's that angle. And then there's the whole angle, as you said, Joint AI Center. They've got a great reputation. They've been bringing in some great talent. They have had somebody, I think, recently leave who said, "You're not letting me get anything done here. You're never going to make any movement forward. This is never going to get anywhere because you guys are all stuck." The military industrial complex is kind of owned by the prime contractors, and therefore you're never going to move forward. So I'm going to quit. And I can't remember who that individual was. So I think there's, the Steve Blank angle of we need to move, but the primes are blocking us from evolving because they like their big fat, contracts that they have. And in the meantime, consumer technology, AI as well, is rocketing ahead, and the country will be left behind, essentially.
mm,
The talk that he did with Dan Fagella, Dan started the podcast with, "Where do you think we are?" And he goes, "I think we're screwed." It was like a really blunt, upfront statement on, I don't think we're going to get out of our own way.
mm,
So I love seeing that they're doing work in this space. I do like seeing Silicon Valley engaging with the DoD and Jake and all these agencies. I'm a huge fan of that. I just think that the biggest issue is probably their internal momentum and the blocking of that innovation and evolution from the prime contractors that just have nothing to lose, right? Other than
mm.
their multi tens of billions of dollar contracts.
Yeah, it will be interesting how the innovation space can get involved given regulation, because you can't just go and test something that drops grenades. But
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of threads to pull on there. Maybe jump into the comments and add yours.
Yes, and I know we'll be talking about this more in kind of future episodes. We like Ian and I started this discussion. We've touched on this before. Our friend Dan Fagella has a whole series of excellent podcast interviews on AI in the DoD and what's happening in that space, including that great interview with Steve Blank. So that's worth a listen for sure. Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll be coming back to this subject, Ian. So that's it for today's episode. If you enjoy these quick updates, you know what to do: like, share, subscribe, all the usual things. And we will see you on the next episode.
See you on the next one. Bye bye.